Welcome, welcome. I see we have more than 300 people already here. It's so wonderful to see you all. And congratulations to all of us on completing another tractate of the Talmud. Eruvin, some say, is a quintessentially rabbinic tractate. The rabbis interpret this law against carrying in the public sphere into existence, and then it is also a rabbinic interpretation that builds the edifice that allows a workaround for that problem. And it might be for that reason, or it might be because there is so much spatial geometry and so much effort expended in visualizing these living spaces that are so different from the ones we occupy today. But for whatever reason, Eruvin is considered one of the most difficult tractates of the Talmud. So you should all be patting yourselves on the back. Especially if you just joined us, kudos to you for stepping up into a really tough tractate. And if you have been with us since January 5th, when we started this cycle of Daf Yomi, you can pat yourself on the back for 3 tractates, 323 pages of Talmud, which is now more than 10% of the whole corpus. So that's really amazing. My name is Rachel Scheinerman, and it has been my privilege to edit the Daily Dose of Talmud newsletter for My Jewish Learning, and that means I get to work with a remarkable pool of talented writers. And I have 3 of them here to join me in a discussion about Tractate Eruvin as we celebrate the completion of this tractate. So I'm going to introduce them, and I'm hoping that they will make some noise or somehow become the main thing on your screen as I introduce them. Let's hope that that works the way it's supposed to. So we have with us today Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter. She was ordained at Yeshivat Maharat. She's the founder and director of the South Philadelphia Shtibel, and she is one of MJL's community experts. So Dasi, you want to wave and make some noise for a sec?
Shalom, great to see you. Great to be with you. Mazel tov.
And we also have with us Rabbi Asher Lopatin, who is the spiritual leader of Kehilat Eitz Chaim in Detroit, Michigan, founder and director of the Detroit Center for Civil Discourse, previously the president of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, and also an MJL community expert. So Asher, Rabbi Lopatin, give us a wave.
Welcome, Detroit, go blue.
There we go, thank you. And we also are very privileged to have Rabbi Avi Strausberg, who was ordained at Hebrew College and is now the director of National Learning Initiatives at Hadar. And you might not know this, but in the last cycle, she posted a haiku for every single page of the Talmud. So Rabbi Strausberg, would you give us a wave and some noise?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Mazel tov.
Okay, here's how this is going to work, folks. Our amazing panelists are each going to give about 5 minutes of reflections on this tractate. And then we're going to have a little discussion seated by some questions that you all provided to us ahead of time. But if you have more questions you would like them to answer, please feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll get to as much as we can. And then when that's done, we will have teaching from the final lines of the tractate, and we will say the traditional blessing for completing an entire tractate of the Talmud. Okay, so let me then pass this on to our panelists. Rabbanit Fruchter, let's start with you and your reflections on this tractate.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and Yasher Koach to everyone here on the completion of Eruvin, and to My Jewish Learning for inspiring this outpouring of Torah learning in the world. It's really inspirational to be here with all over 400 of you today. And Eruvin for me, it was really special, not just because it kept my personal Daf Yomi community tight and connected throughout this process, but also because our community was in the process of expanding our Eruv while we were learning Masechas Eruvin. Very, very special to see the concepts come to life. And I want to share with you an insight that's been with me throughout the learning of Eruvin, and also throughout the moments while I was stringing a wire or fixing a fence in real life to create a boundary for our community here in South Philly. And it's based on a Rambam, a piece of Maimonides that comes centuries later after the Talmud, but he asks a question, and that question is, what's this Eruv? Like, why do we call it that? And, you know, that's been in the back of our minds, and it's been something we think about throughout the whole tractate. What is this Eruv? Is the Eruv up? Is the Eruv down? What is the word Eruv? And Rambam says, well, it has to be a rave. It has to be mixed. Actually, everything has to be mixed up together. All of the food from everybody in the community has to be equal and accessible to everyone. And here's the phrase that I've been holding. It says, Sheyad kulanu shava. Everyone, every single person has to have equal stakes in the Eruv. So I'm just looking around the screen and I'm imagining one person can't provide like 8 meals worth and the other person like 2 crumbs. Everyone has to have equal stakes in the project of community building, in the project of creating what it means to be a part of one ecosystem. And I keep holding that, and I'm holding that as we build a real community and a real Eruv. What does it mean for each of us to have a Yad Shava, equal stakes? I don't think we always get that right. And I am so excited every time when I look at the pages of Eruvin. You know, some people groan, and that's okay too, but there's something so special about the attention to the detail of creating this environment where everybody's hand is equal. And finally, I guess I'll just say that, you know, we see over and over again in the tractate, halacha kemekel be'eruvin, like kedivrei mekel be'eruvin. We usually rule leniently when it comes to Eruv. Anyone remember this? This concept comes up over and over again. You should be lenient, apply leniencies to this halacha of Eruv. And what's so interesting is that on the ground in real life, that's actually not the case. Often Eruvs rely on very few leniencies. We have some, but we actually go stringent for a lot of it. And that's because we're all working really hard on creating an equal stakes environment. Sheyad kulanu shava, everyone has to buy in. So sometimes it actually does not serve communal unity to just be like, all right, everyone will just find all the leniencies. And really, let's think about how we need to put the goal of bringing us all together at the very top and letting everything flow from there. So just an interesting difference in how it works on the ground and how the Gemara has been talking about it. And my bracha, my blessing for all of us, is looking around this room that we continue to find equal stakes in leading and uniting our communities.
Amen. Rabbi Lopatin, would you give us a few words?
Thanks so much, Rachel, and thank you, Rabbanit Fruchter, for those beautiful words. So actually, Rabbanit Fruchter, you talked about stringency. So I'm a student of Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, and the Soloveitchiks, as you may know, being Lithuanians, are kind of anti-Eruv. So first of all, they said, no one's allowed to even talk about Eruvs and setting up an Eruv unless, have you studied the whole Tractate Eruvin? So yesher koach to everyone here, or you know, even if you haven't, but everyone that has really studied it. So you can raise your hand and say, yes, I've studied that. I can comment about Eruv. I have some expertise on Eruvs. And by the way, this is one of the Ani Masechta, one of the Ayin Nun Yud, the poor Masechta that most people never do. So it's incredible that you've ventured into this. It's not that the Soloveitchiks deny the whole existence of this tractate, but they kind of say that it's very difficult to make an Eruv. They're kind of like what Rabbanit Fruchter talked about, being sort of very strict. So I wanted to mention a powerful Rashi who it's on Daf Nun Tet Amud Aleph 59a. It's that Mishnah, you may recall, that says, Ir shel yachid v'naseit shel rabin. So there was a private city that became a public city, ma'arvin et kula. You can make the whole thing an Eruv. And right there's a critical Rashi that many say is the basis for our modern day Eruvs. How can we make Eruvs in these big cities? There was a big fight in New York and in Brooklyn and, oh my goodness, the Flatbush Eruv. So, and it was a fight in Chicago where I was, everywhere. But Rashi right there says, what is a small city as long as shelo hayu nichnasim ba tamid samech ribo shel bnei adam the Lo Chashiva Reshut Harabim. As long as 600,000 people do not go on it every day, then it's a small city. Where does Rashi get this from? Well, go back to the wilderness. That's where the laws of Shabbat, the inspiration for the laws of Shabbat, were those 40 years in the wilderness. And there were more than 600,000 people. There were women, yes, and there were children, and there were elderly, but basically there were 600,000, let's say, family units, war-going age people. That's where the 600,000 comes from. So any kind of road or pathway or thing that has less than 600,000 can have an Eruv. Now, some people say, well, the Rambam disagrees with Rashi. So I want to just mention for a minute that the great legal authority, the Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein, says, don't worry. You don't have to worry. You don't have to rely on this Rashi. Basically, the end of the Rashi is more important. He says, lo damya lediglei midbar. We got to go back and analyze what were the traffic patterns in the 40 years in the wilderness, in the days of Moses. So even though Eruvs sort of are discussed by Shlomo, King Solomon, go back and let's see. And according to the Aruch HaShulchan, he says basically there were many routes in those days in the wilderness. You could go from the tribe of Dan to the tribe of Asher, to the tribe of Gad, to all over. There were many routes. As long as you have many routes like that, it's not a public domain. If there's a city, and he says in the days of the Romans, when you had one main east-west and one main, like the north-south route, that's a public domain, but not if you have many routes. So I'm blessed to be in Detroit. Detroit has a lot of highways. God, thank God. I go 1 mile. I go on the highway to go to my shopping 1 mile away. Many different routes. The Aruch HaShulchan says, hey, our cities today with many routes and all that many highways, that's just like it was in the wilderness. And I think the beautiful meaning here is Eruvs, all these detailed laws of Eruvs, they take us back to the days of the rabbis, the Roman period, and then they take us back. We're reliving history. We're going back to what was it like in the days of Moses and Tzipporah and Aaron and Miriam. What was it like there? What was traveling around the camp like in those days? So when we live with this concept of Eruv, we are connecting with the oldest history or imagined history of the Jewish people. And I think that just as we've gotten from the camp in the wilderness to today's world, to 2020, and we're still here, God willing, the laws of Eruvs and the tradition of Eruv and thinking about it, and if you did learning about it, will get us to continue to a wonderful future where we really are connected with the Jewish people, with the world, and with the entire history that goes back thousands of years and that will go forward thousands of years as well. So Yesher Koach, everybody, and keep binding us together with that history and with the entire camp and the entire people.
May that be so. Okay, thank you, Rabbi Lopatin. Rabbi Strausberg, would you give us a few words?
I would love to. So great to be with you. You can follow me orally, but if you're a visual learner, I just dropped the text I'm going to be referring to into the chat, so feel free to open those up. I'm excited to share one of my, I would say far and away, to the extent that we learn in Eruvin that you're not supposed to actually choose between texts and halachot and show favorites. This text, when I just learned it, I thought that the language of it was so beautiful, so I'm excited to share it. We learned that there are two instances in Eruvin in that when people find themselves out of the boundaries, beyond the boundaries of community, that it's actually human bodies that bring them back in. So the first text that I want to look at and share with you, it's on Daf 43b. And so there's a story of Nehemiah, who is the son of Rav Hanilai. So the story goes to the Gemara that Nehemiah, he was so engrossed in his learning, he was so occupied with his nose in his book, Nifat Chutz Letchum, that he found himself on Shabbat accidentally going out beyond the boundaries of Shabbat. So engrossed was he didn't realize he went out beyond the tchum of the city. Amar le Rav Chisda le Rav Nachman. So Rav Chisda notices that Nehemiah finds himself outside of the boundaries of Shabbat, so he's going to be unable to get back in, his nose in a book. And so Rav Chisda, concerned, says to Rav Nachman, Nehemiah, Talmidcha sharui b'tza'ar. So he says, Rav Chisda says to Rav Nachman, your student, he is stuck outside of the tchum. He's not going to be able to get back in. What should we do for him? Amar lo. And so Rav Nachman says back to Rav Chisda, Aselo mechitza shel bnei adam v'yikanes. He says, make him a mechitza, make him a partition of people, and then he'll be able to get back in. And so the idea behind that is earlier, a few dapim earlier, there was a Mishnah that Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah had espoused the opinion that if someone is forcibly taken out from their place, taken out beyond their tchum, their boundary on Shabbat, and put in some sort of cell or an enclosure that's larger than 4 amot, those walls or those partitions act to sort of enclose the space and make it so they're able to walk in all of the space, not just in their dalet amot, their 4 amot around them, but the whole space becomes their space. And that discussion, that opinion also gets carried on to a ship, which is a machloket there, but also if you're taken out, if you're on a ship on Shabbat, sort of like the boundaries that extend of the ship, are they partitions enough such that the whole ship becomes like your 4 amot? But the idea there is that if a person gets stuck outside of the tchum, they haven't extended their boundary, they're not going to be able to get back because they were so engrossed in their learning. What do we do for them? We can make them partitions using our bodies, and through our bodies transform the space for them so that all of it becomes their dalet amot, and they're able to walk back in until they can get back inside the tchum, which just seems to me like such a powerful idea of the moments in which people may find themselves accidentally or not even accidentally, the moments in which people find themselves outside of community, especially in this moment of COVID, when there's so many people that are finding themselves feeling stranded or abandoned or lost, right? Their heads in the book, something brings us outside the community, and that the rabbis are suggesting that we can literally use our bodies as a way of bringing people back in. I want to share just one more text with you again, in which the bodies are the way that we bring people back in. There's another text that we just learned, Tractate Eruvin, this is around 95a, 95b. The conversation again is what happened if our, the dearness, the affection that we feel for tefillin, what happened if tefillin find themselves out of the tchum on Shabbat? How do we bring the tefillin back in? And there's an opinion in there, again, that everyone is able to carry, by as long as you're carrying less than dalet amot, you're carrying less than 4 amot, then no one is violating carry. So to line multiple people up to carry those tefillin, passing them along one at a time, and you could just sort of imagine the dearness, the affection for how do we get these tefillin safely in. But of course the rabbis extended, we're not just talking about tefillin. What happens if a baby is born outside of the tchum on Shabbat? So now we have a human baby, and we need to get that baby back in the tchum. And they say, again, the same thing. If a baby is born, is stuck outside the tchum on Shabbat, what do? We literally line up the community members, and one at a time, they pass the baby along until the baby is able to get inside. It reminds you of the vision of when we had in-person baby namings, of lining up the family members and passing the baby as the baby comes into the room. So that in the first example, it's our bodies are forming the mechitza to transform the space. And in the second example, it's literally our bodies that are doing the carrying. So I just wanted to bring these texts as powerful windows. For one, how powerful it is that Rav Chisda actually notices in the text. Rav Chisda notices your student, Nehemiah, has got himself stuck outside. So the first thing is being able to notice, when are people in our community stuck on the outside? When do they need someone to see that they're outside and they need the hand to bring that back in, that we should be perceptive enough to see when people are out there. And the second, the possibility, the power that sometimes it's actually our own bodies, it's our resources. How do we come together as a community to use our bodies to form a mechitza, a bnei adam, so that people are able to come back in and be welcomed back in through our bodies, through our arms, into community.
Thank you all for those thoughts. I really appreciate it. We're gonna now turn to some of the questions that you submitted to us ahead of time. And Rabbi Strausberg, I'm gonna stick with you for now. One question that was asked in various forms was basically the question of why are the rabbis so detail oriented, right? Is it because they believed that this is what God required of them? Was it an intellectual exercise? Was it a spiritual exercise? What are your thoughts?
I think it's such a great question, especially as so much of Tractate Eruvin is these, what feels to us like minutia, these nuances of halakha. The first thing I just want to say is there were several moments in the tractate where someone said there was really beautiful language, where one rabbi would come up to another rabbi and say, share with us some excellent teachings, share with us an excellent halakha. And I just thought those moments were so amazing. When does anyone, I mean, some people must do it, but when does anyone walk into a Beit Midrash or encounter a friend and say, teach me some really amazing halakha, that it just shows the love that they must have felt for halakha, that when they greet one another, that's what they say. Tell me that excellent teaching that I forgot that one time. So I find that really powerful to relate to halakha, to relate to Torah as this thing of excellence that you're just waiting to bask in, waiting to reveal. A second thing that's coming up for me in Eruvin, again, as I referenced before, is it's actually in Tractate Eruvin, which I think is so appropriate, that Eruvin says it teaches us to not distinguish between a good halakha and a bad halakha. That is specifically in the context of one of these cases where someone says, that's a really great halakha, which seems, I think, really sweet. Like someone's like, oh, I love that halakha. It's so important to me. I'm going to take that home with me. And then that rabbi is reprimanded for, well, it's great that you think that that's good halakha, but what does that imply about your relationship to other halachot? And that as soon as we start distinguishing in between, saying, well, this is a really good one, but this I'm less compelled and less excited about, then it sort of weakens the whole project. It puts us in this position of picking and choosing our learning. So for me, that was, I think we encountered that relatively early in Eruvin. That was important sort of for me as a whole header to the Masechet, of lest we think we're going to write off Masechet Eruvin as that long, boring Masechet of minutia, is to say, actually, we have to find a way to relate to all of the tractates, to all the details with that same level of love and excellence. And then the last thing that I just want to say for that, it sort of reminds me sometimes when we get stuck in the weeds in Vayikra and in the end of Shmot of detailing the building of the Mishkan, and we just sort of feel like sometimes, some people talk about this, that the parsha will just go on and on about all the various details. And are the details, what is it about the details? I think of the expression God is in the details, but from the sense of it's so hard to know what God's will in this world is, that there are ways in which I think for many of us, God's presence is in fact quite hidden. For those of us that are lucky enough to have God's will expressed very clearly, I think that's an amazing blessing. For those of us that are perhaps more like me, that God's will is less explicitly revealed or God's presence is less revealed, that there are different ways, we have to try and work really hard to get at God's will, to try to understand what God wants of us, and also how we can do something for God. And I think that the details of halakha are one answer. Different people have different ways of trying to understand that, but if we can really focus in on the details, that's the best sense that we have of trying to do what God wants and to do what's being asked of us.
Thank you. Thank you. Rabbi Lopatin and Rabbanit Fruchter, do you want to weigh in on that question at all?
I would just say that one of the challenges is really trying to find meanings in those details. And I think different generations will find different meanings in those details. And maybe, those details are left for, future generations to find meaning in. And just as, we've heard, the laws of that detail, like Rabbi Strausberg talked about carrying the baby or the tefillin or, a human mechitza. I think our generation that is so oriented towards the individual, it resonates with us. So I hope that with enough effort that we make in every generation, there'll be a little different detailed halacha that will actually have a poignant meaning.
Thank you. Okay, a lot of our readers noticed that the description of Eruvin in this tractate involved very solid things like walls, and that a lot of contemporary Eruvin involve things like wires and fishing line that are almost invisible. And they wanted to know, how did we get from the one to the other? So Rabbanit, Fruchter, in particular you, because we know, and some of our readers may not know, but you have actually been involved in setting up an Eruv while studying this tractate. I'd like to kick that question to you first.
Sure. And just also, if I may, about the question of setting up an Eruv, hopefully what we're all taking away from this also is how many steps there are, right? Like there's so many different steps. So for example, like we discussed the Schirat Reshut, like needing to rent the space from all of the non-Jews in the area, and also you need access to all of the Jewish homes. That happened a long time before I got here, right? That's like a legal process in every city, which is really cool and interesting. And I want to invite everybody here. I've been like evangelizing about this a little bit. If you have an Eruv in your city, go see it. Go take a walk and bring a cup of coffee and get to know it. So about the walls, just understanding, like if you understand like a simple Eruv map, looking from a bird's eye view, you see a boundary around a particular area. And what that is, it's a boundary around an area that's trying to turn that whole area into a private domain, into a Reshut HaYachid. So you can carry within that domain on Shabbos. Now, an Eruv, the boundary can be made up of a variety of structures. One would be a real physical structure, like a wall or even like a tree trunk, a series of real physical structures. And number two, it could also be made up of like hills. If it's steep enough, you might remember that. Talamid Laket, so it has to be at a very particular incline. And then number three, if you saw My Jewish Learning's post today of John Stewart and the Eruv, they joke on TV and in general about an Eruv being a fishing line, right? That's the joke, that's the punchline. So what are those?
That was my private Facebook page, but yes.
Oh, sorry.
They should have posted it publicly.
Yes. Oh,
everyone check out the John Stewart sketch, the interview in Long Island Community Say Up an Eruv.
So what is that? What is that thing? It is a presumptive doorway. It's not a real doorway. It is called a Tzurat HaPetach. It's a part of a wall, but it's often made of poles and wires or strong string. And we use those to close up a gap around our area when we do not have the correct physical structures to be able to do that. So we use all of the structures we have in a city to create these Tzurat HaPetach, and that's a really, really cool halachic fiction, right, that we're able to do that. And if you recall also in Masechas Eruvin, did you notice sometimes they were only willing to go like only a certain absurd length for some of these fictions? You remember Rabbi Lopatin and Rabbi Strausberg? Sometimes it was like, okay, we can't really pretend in that case, right? That's really not a wall because X, Y, or Z. But actually there is space to imagine doorways, and that's what those wires are. And they usually operate in partnership with other physical structures like walls. It's not that there are no walls and just wires, it's that there are both.
And there's a beautiful, I think it's a beautiful concept that the doorway represents both that within that Eruv area that the doorway delineates is our responsibility, as Rabbi Fruchter talked about, to be a collective, to be a caring collective and look out for everyone in an equal way. But it also represents, in some ways, it's better to have a doorway. I'm not saying so much halachically, but it means that we are open to the outside and we are welcoming people from outside our Eruv to come in. So there's a real beauty that that our Eruvs, our new private domain, is our city is not something that we want to reject people from the outside, but it's also, for the most part, at Tzurat HaPetach, let's welcome people in, and maybe one day we'll expand the Eruv to include them as well.
Okay, we have a follow-up question in the chat. The viewers want to know, is it really true in the contemporary day that all Jews in the area have contributed some sort of food to the Eruv? And have all the Gentiles in the area actually done something to rent their property to the Jews?
Rabbi Fruchter.
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. There is not like, I can't knock on the guy 2 doors down from me and be like, hey, I know I rented this space from you, but whatever, you know, he doesn't know, right? It's a city council agreement, right, that we can use all city land for this Eruv. So that's kind of that workaround. And then the food, actually, we rely on the concept that we've seen in Eruvin as well, that we can benefit a person not in their presence. So even though all of you did not give to the Eruv, I can still give to the Eruv on your behalf. I can gift you the Eruv.
And actually, right, I mean, when I was in Chicago, when we set up our Eruv in Lakeview, the boxes of matzah were in my office. And so there really is food there. And anyone who wanted to come and have some 5-year-old dry matzah was welcome to have it. So it's really there. It's symbolic, but it's real. And I would just add that when you have an Eruv, you have a responsibility that, you really should make sure that if someone needs food, if there's someone, that hard times or good times or a simcha, that you are really there and you follow that, the spirit of the law of really being open to sharing your food and to being a good community, like one home, like almost one family.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question we had. I'm not sure quite the right tone for this, but the question was, why was Eruvin so hard? And so I think the spirit behind the question is both what about it makes it hard, and also like why would the rabbis even have a tractate that is so hard? I think I hear both things in that question. And the follow-up to that is also, what should we look forward as we move into Tractate Pesachim? So Rabbi Lopatin, you want to take that one first?
I will start, but yeah, look, I think that, first of all, you have something great to look forward to. Pesachim is very open. In fact, it might even be easier than Shabbat, and not quite easier than Brachot, but, and very familiar to us. I think that perhaps Eruvin comes as a contrast to Shabbat. I mean, Shabbat is something that we have a lot of experience with, and there's a real sense of ownership. The Jewish people, it was a gift to the Jewish people. Eruvin is, in a sense, it's 201 or it's 501. It's an extra level, and I think it's almost like earning Shabbat. So Shabbat is a gift and everyone has it. No one has to earn it. But if you really did Eruvin, that means you really earned your Shabbat, and you have a higher level of real ownership of Shabbat because of that difficulty. So I will punt to my other panelists, but at least I can tell you that Pesachim will be easier.
I think for me, in terms of its hardness, actually, what's resonating with me is actually hearing Rabbanit Fruchter talking about being in the process of constructing an Eruvin. I think part of what makes it hard, or at least hard for me, is that in my everyday life, I rely on the Eruvin that other people have constructed for me, and I live within it. And even as a rabbi, I have very little to do with the Eruvin. Sometimes I am delighted. I'm so delighted when I'm in a city or I'm at like a summer camp or something, and I get to actually see the string, and so I'm like, oh, that it's actually really, there's something I think so powerful when you come into contact with it. Because so much of the time, it's like, it's a thing, there's the matzah in the basement somewhere. I think that that's happening, but I'm not the one building it. And so then when you actually hear a Rabbanit Fruchter talking about, like, it's a real thing, like there's a city council and there's the, you actually have to go through the work of doing it. Suddenly, like if I were to have learned Eruvin and someone had said to me at the end of this tractate, you will have to build an Eruv in these 5 different types of terrains by the sea and in this context, in this context, in this context, suddenly it would still be totally overwhelming, but it would be a lot more meaningful to me because I would be held accountable for it. And I think that's part of what the rabbis are doing, is that they're having to envision every circumstance to play it out. And as learners, oftentimes we're not putting ourselves in the driver's seat of what if I actually had to enact when I actually show up to the summer camp and there's no Eruv and I'm responsible for it, would I have taken the knowledge from that tractate to do it? And I think the second thing is just also like the Mishkan, going back to the Mishkan in the Torah, is these tractates that are so spatial it takes so, unless you are that kind of engineer math learner, it takes so much energy to sustain the focus of trying to be able to map it out and envision, and thank God for the Steinsaltz and the pictures and all of that. But even then, you really have to put so much energy and so much continued love into, do I have the measurements? Am I playing it out? Could I make it in my head?
Yeah, and actually just going back to the measurements of the temple, right, in the last page or so, like we learned about like repairs that needed to be made in the temple, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this masechet, this tractate is for people who like to work with their hands, right? It's like, Baruch Hashem, thank God that it's like not all in the mind, right? It's not all matters of the spirit, right? It's like, I keep thinking the only reason I think it's hard is because I don't know how to put together IKEA furniture, right? And it intimidates me. But actually, having completed Eruvin and having been very intimidated about it from the outset, what I realized is it's actually not easier, but there are fewer concepts in it than in other tractates. Like, we can actually close our discussion and be like, okay, here are 15 things we learned. And that's not the case necessarily for other tractates. They're very all over the place. Here it's like very specifically about this one thing. And I feel empowered by that can be a way to learn Gemara too, a way to learn Talmud as well.
Rabbanit, Fruchter, why doesn't IKEA have a build your own Eruv kit yet?
I think we just made our work for the rest of the afternoon. Rabbi Lopatin, Rabbi Strausberg, we'll get on a conference call. Yeah.
I think we need to tell them. One more thing that folks seemed really interested in discussing was this idea that Eruv creates a sense of community. The restrictions can be challenging, but it can also help bind people together. And people wanted to discuss this idea, and in particular, how that feels to us in an age of COVID. So would one of you like to take that up?
I can jump in. Back to the minutia. If you have an Eruv in your community, you have to check it every week. And when it comes to community, you can't depend on your mission statement to say your community is welcoming. You can't depend on it. You have to check it every week. You have to check the structures, the infrastructure, and especially when it comes to COVID, you have to like work on every flippin' wire, right? Like to make sure all of the connections are happening to enclose us as a community.
I think also maybe the idea is the blessing that we have to have community, and we have to try to, we have a whole masechet about how to bring people together, how to bring ourselves together, whether it's Tchum Shabbat distances, or whether it's carrying, or whether it's eating or anything like that. And we have to not give up on community, even during COVID. Rachel and I, my wife and I, on Shabbat, we have a very small shul here, Kilat Etz Chaim. We walk around our neighborhood to go to everyone in the shul over a course of a month of Shabbatot. And in fact, there's one person in the community that we love walking to, lives 45 minutes away, on the edge of the Eruv. And the fact that half of it, one door is in the Eruv, the other door of his building's outside the Eruv, and you have to remember that when you're carrying something, it reminds you of how precious community is. And whether you're building that community by Zoom, or whether you're doing it by just walking around and waving to people and saying hi to people in the street, whatever it is, I think not to give up on community, and that this whole tractate is there to really remind us how the incredible lengths that our rabbis went to enable us to have that community and to work hard for it.
Rabbi Lopatin and Rabbanit Fruchter said it beautifully. I would direct people who are interested in thinking more about the connection between Eruvin and community and COVID. My colleague at Hadar, Rabbi Avi Kilip, just published a Siyyum that went out yesterday, specifically where she talks about, the central idea of Shabbat is no one should go out from their home. And that's a lot of what we're doing in COVID is that, we're staying in our homes. No one should, really the safest thing that we can do is to stay in our homes. And yet at the same time, the rabbis recognize that it's actually not sustainable to observe Shabbat or to live a life in which you're literally not able to go out to your home. And so Eruvin is that tension between how do we fulfill no one should go out from our homes? How do we fulfill people should stay safe and stay home while also still doing that in the context of community. What does it look like to have these really strict boundaries around Shabbat, but then also to find safe ways to expand those boundaries to keep us in community, but in a way that feels safe and sustainable. So you can find that through Hadar, Rabbi Avi Killip.
Thank you all. I think we will stick with this thought of community as we move toward the conclusion of this Siyyum. We have an amazing community here, you and the other amazing authors that we work with, the 400 people that are on the Zoom call, the nearly 31,000 people that get the daily dose of Talmud from MJL, which is just a small fraction of the number of people in the world who are embarking on this project of studying Talmud a page a day together all around the world. So it is truly amazing to be part of all those communities and to feel connected in this way, even in the age of COVID and through the computer. To conclude today, we're gonna, Rabbi Lopatin is gonna just take us out of the tractate by teaching from the last page, from the last few lines. And then Rabbanit Fruchter and Rabbi Strausberg are gonna lead us in the traditional prayer said upon completing a tractate. So Rabbi Lopatin, I'm gonna pass it back to you for those last few lines.
Thank you so much. And this is really a great honor. So we had a Mishnah on Kuf Daled Amud Bet on 104.2, which had ended off with Rabbi Shimon, and in its sort of not clear language. So the Gemara at the end on 105a, 7 lines from the bottom, tries to clarify. And it's a little confusing because, or strange, I should say, because Rabbi Shimon, if you remember, maybe from Masechet Shabbat, was very lenient on a lot of things. Here he's not so lenient. So it says, Rabbi Shimon Omer, he said a few things. He said at the end of Makom Shi'chu L'Chachamim, Mishalchan Natnu Lacha. Says when our rabbis are lenient, they're not really being lenient. They're just taking from your own account, really. It's coming from you. What does that mean? So the Gemara there says, what is that? Hechakai, hatam kai. This is what it's referring to. The same thing as Rabbi Strausberg mentioned, so the Mishnah says that if you're stuck, you went your 2,000 feet and you didn't make it to the town and it got dark, it's Shabbat, and you're stuck out of the town even 1 cubit. Lo yikanes, they're very strict. You can't come back in. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, no. Afilu chamesh esrei yikanes. He says, I'll give you another 15 cubits. That's cool. So it seems like, thank you, Rabbi Shimon. You're really sensitive. You really get it. Says, no, I'm not being nice about it. I'm just being, this is a law. He says, when they measured the 2,000 cubits and they put down sticks, they knew that there are going to be people like you that are not going to make it and they're going to overreach. So they really made it 1,985 cubits. And so it worked out okay. So so Rabbi Shimon's being nice, but he's saying, I'm only being nice. I'm not really compromising the law. The next point is similar kind of point. I'm not going to be nice, but I'm going to let you do something. Hechakai, hatamkai. This is referring to the following Mishnah that we had earlier. The Kamar Tanakama Koshra. So the Tanakama lets you tie, if the string broke on one of the violins or the lyres or whatever they were playing in the temple, the Levites. It's crazy that now traditionally, there's no musical instruments. In the temple, the dafka were musical instruments. So, Rabbi Shimon, on va'aniva, says, you know what? You cannot tie it. I'm being strict, but I will let you tie a bow. Why? I'm not afraid that that's going to lead you to do a Torah violation. Therefore, Sharule, Rabbanan, so therefore, since you're not coming to the Duachatat, Sharule Rabbanan. Therefore, the rabbis allowed you to do it. Kshira, but if you tie it, I'm not going to let you tie it because even though it's not a violation with tying that one string, Ati lidei chiyuchatat, you might come to a Torah violation. Lo sharu le Rabbanan. Therefore, they did not let you do it. The rabbis, according to Rabbi Shimon, not let you do it. So once again, it's interesting, and this is really one of the themes of Eruvin. The rabbis are restricting you, saying, we're not letting you do whatever you want to do. It's not Hefkerwelt. It's not whatever you want to do, but we're going to find ways of you living a meaningful life. We're going to find ways of you getting back into the city if you're stuck outside the tchum. It's not 1,000 cubits, but a few cubits, 15 cubits, it's okay. Likewise, if that string breaks, we're going to find a way of doing it. You can't tie it. I'm very strict, but I'm going to let you tie a bow. And I think that's an important approach in general to halakha. Really, ideally, we have to find ways of the law and these details being meaningful and working for people in this world, and especially in the era of COVID. How are we going to make synagogue? How are we going to make together? How are we going to make it work? And we have to struggle with that. Rabbi Shimon is saying that I'm going to work tirelessly to make it work, but I'm not doing it by cheating halakha. I'm doing it by what's already built into the system, what already mishalcha, what already you have. And so I hope that now that we're experts in Eruvin and we've done it, we can continue to try to make Judaism and these detailed halachot meaningful. And it's not because we're taking away from the law or because we're not being careful, but it's really mishalcha. These are things, this is our Torah, and we have to, I believe that the rabbis and our tradition really want to allow it to work for us. So we have to be like Rabbi Shimon to make it work, to be strong, to be faithful, to be authentic, but make it work and make it meaningful.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Rabbi Strausberg, are you next?
I'm next. I'm ready. Are we putting anything up or should I just go ahead?
MDL Technical, see the magic.
Looks like it's happening right here.
Looks like it's happening.
Okay.
We're going to try and put the Hadron and the Kaddish on the screen for you so you can follow along. If not, we should have a link to where you can see that online.
Sorry.
All right, thank you for trying there.
Working on it 1 second. Let's just start and I'll see if I can get it.
Okay.
Ben, good to hear from you. Ben in the background, Ben Harris. Good job.
Yeah, that's Ben Harris, working the magic behind the scenes.
Okay. Hadran alach Masechet Eruvin, the Adrach Alan, the Tan alach Masechet Eruvin, the Atach Alan, La Nit Nashe Minach Masechet Eruvin, the La Tit Nashe Minan, La Be'alma Hadin, the La Be'alma De'ate. Yehi Ratzon Me'afanecha, Denai Elohinu Elohei Avotenu, Shetei Toratcha, Umanu Tenu Be'olam Hazeh, Tehe Imanu Le'olam Haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachis bar Papa, Sorcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Harev na Adonai Elohenu et divrei Tortecha befinu ufi imcha Beit Yisrael. V'nehiyeh anachnu v'te'te'enu v'te'te'enu v'te'te'e amcha Beit Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shmecha v'lomdei Tortecha lishma. Me'ovai techachmenu mitzvotecha ki leolam hili. Yehili bi tamim bechukecha lema'an lo evosh leolam lo ishkach pikudecha kivam chiyitani. Baruch atah Adonai lamdeni chukecha. Amen, amen, amen. Selah va'ed. Modim anachnu lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu shesamta chalkenu me'yoshvei Beit HaMidrash ve'lo samta chalkenu me'yoshvei kranot she'anu mashkimim v'hem mashkimim anu mashkimim ledivrei Torah v'hem mashkimim ledvarim telim anu amelim v'hem amelim anu amelim u'mekablim schar v'hem amelim ve'enam mekablim schar anu ratzim v'hem ratzim anu ratzim l'chayei olam haba v'hem ratzim lebe'er shachat shene'emar ve'ata Elohim toridem lebe'er shachat anshe damim u'mirma lo yichatzu yimehem ve'ani eftach bach.
Yehi ratzon lefanecha Adonai Elohai kashem she'azartani l'sayim masechet Eruvin kain ta'azrini latzchil masechtot u'sfarim achirim l'saymam lilmod u'lelamed lishmor v'lasot u'lekayim et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha bi'ava וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים יעמוד לי ולזרעי שלא תמוש התורה מפי ומפי זרי וזרע זרי עד עולם, ותתקיים בי, בהי תהלכך תנחה אותך, בשכבך תשמור עליך, בהקיצות ההיא תשיחך. כי בי ירבו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינה ובשמאלה אושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו ושלום.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Lopatin, Rabbi Strausberg, and Rabbanit Fruchter for joining us. Thank you, all of you, for making this community of study with us. And we will see you in a couple months, just ahead of Pesach, for our Siyyum on Tractate Pesachim. But we can now all dive into the new tractate. Bye, everyone.
Zal tov, Yasher Koach.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.